I mean, one of the things that I keep remembering when we have these discussions over the last 10 days is that we talk about the 9/11 first responders and what a magnificent job they did, that they were running into a building when everybody else was running out. 19 years later, those first responders are still suffering from a shameful lack of treatment and support, and they've never been properly thanked, and they're certainly not having their extraordinary physical disabilities dealt with by anybody. So,
is there nothing to his assertion that he said when he says we're discouraged from acting on our own, we're forced to bow to experts?
I don't think, well, I can see that...
Your gut reaction, I'm going to go in there.
Yeah, well, and people did, and people do. And then there's a point where the people with the expertise have to take control, right? There's a two-phase thing going on.
Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I got quite enraged reading this piece. I think it's incredibly easy to be a keyboard warrior and to write these things. I mean, the first responders, the private citizens who went in, were absolutely brave and naturally did the right thing. They followed their initial instinct. But then it is just logical that when the experts come in, you then put in place some caution and follow that. And I saw there's all this commentary in the days immediately going, it will be a very easy job to go in and recover those bodies. You then see the commander of the SAS squad, who is, they're hardly sort of easy touches, saying this is some of the most difficult and challenging terrain that we've ever encountered. We were trudging through knee-deep toxic sludge. I mean, it clearly wasn't an easy environment or an easy place to recover these bodies from. And it's very easy to kind of get outraged about red tape. And I noticed, Mark in that piece talks about Pike River. Well, the reason why probably Pike River happened in the first place was because there wasn't enough red tape. People were a bit fast and loose. They weren't following proper processes. So process is there for a reason. Expertise is there for a reason. Now, it shouldn't be blindly followed or slavishly followed, but generally, I think I'm going to side with the experts.
But if you're in a community and you see a disaster unfold, there is, Thomas, is there not an initial gut response to say, what can we do with the resources we have now before any official response,
100%.
before any cordon? What does Mark say? He goes, it's quite interesting. The GNS risk measurements were a prop. The decision to go on was based on very human factors: personnel who are ready to volunteer, families who are waiting, international attention.
And I tell you what, 100%, and I can completely understand why those first civilian helicopter pilots flew in there and rescued those people. And I think it's amazing that they did that. But it is then just, it would be foolish in the extreme to then carry on when people have arrived with expertise and have assessed the situation.
And you also have to be super careful about people who have friends and whānau on the island who are themselves in deep grief and suffering trauma, going off and doing what kind of amounts to search and rescue vigilantism.
And I mean, I sort of feel for the police and the authorities in this, because say if they said, okay, we'll let you go in once they'd assess the scene, and something happened, I think people like Mark might be the first ones to write a piece condemning the reckless attitude of the police and how dare they allow this to happen. So I have a lot of sympathy for the authorities in this case.
You're both on the side where we should just sort of, we as people watching from the outside should chill and let the experts do what they do.
Yeah, I think in that first phase you follow your instincts, and then it gets handed over to people who actually have the training and expertise.
Well, I really appreciate you both being with me this afternoon. Michelle Acorn and Thomas Pryor, thank you very much for being on the panel this afternoon. Thank you to Ali for putting the show together. I'm Wallace Chapman, and back tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint is up next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo rerangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haereaki nei, the Pike River recovery team breaks through the mine's second seal, 170 metres into the drift. 4 men go in for the first time since it was concreted up 8 years ago. WorkSafe dodges questions about whether tours to Whakaari White Island were properly policed. Bad weather stops the search for 2 bodies still missing after the eruption. And an American lawyer says the injured from White Island could be due millions in compensation. Fishing and tour operators struggling in what should be their peak season anxiously wait for details of the government relief package. And where is Bruce Buchani? The former Manus Island refugee came to New Zealand on a book tour. Is there a plot twist?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The police have begun scouring far eastern Bay of Plenty coastline as the search continues for two bodies missing after the eruption on Whakaari White Island. The missing have been named as 40-year-old local tour guide Hayden Marshall Inman and 17-year-old Australian Winona Langford. Deputy Police Commissioner Mike Clements says bad weather has prevented helicopters from searching around the volcano and dive teams haven't been able to get back into the water. But he says they have started searching around Cape Runaway.
There was going to be any drift in the tide of a body that was on the surface of the water anyway, that could potentially go that way. So we have been searching over there as well.
Mike Clements says they haven't given up hope of finding the bodies, but it's possible they won't turn up. Whakatane fishing and tour operators say they are losing thousands of dollars a day due to restrictions put in place following the eruption. As they head into what is usually their peak season, they're anxiously waiting to hear more details about the relief package to be offered to small businesses in the new year. Anusha Bradley is in Whakatane.
The owner of Fishing and More, Neil Cook, says he's losing $1,000 a day in sales because of the rahui along the coastline. He supports and respects the rahui but would like to see it reduced to just around the island. Diveworks Charters owner Phil Vanderschoten says he's losing more than $2,000 a day, having to cancel tours to nearby Whale Island. He says 4 casual staff now have no work. Ko Anusha Bradley Aho.
A 4-man team has moved beyond the 170-metre seal in the Pike River mine for the first time in 8 years. It's seen as a major development in the painstaking job of examining the 2.3-kilometre entry tunnel to the mine. The aim is to look for clues as to why the mine exploded and recover any of the bodies of the 29 men who died. The Pike River Recovery Agency's Chief Operating Officer, Dingy Pattinson, was accompanied by 3 others, including a structural engineer, when they opened the door in the seal and briefly inspected the other side. The next job will be reinforcing the roof and walls of the tunnel later in January. An Austrian oil company has been given the green light for a controversial consent to drill off the Otago coast. The Environmental Protection Authority granted OMV GSB Limited's application to drill up to 10 exploration and appraisal wells and discharge into the ocean. The EPA says it sought expert advice and found the potential effects are not significant as they are either temporary or involve a small area. The Waitangi Tribunal has found the Crown breached the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi by failing to consult properly with iwi with overlapping interests in the Parihoraki Treaty settlement. The settlement was fiercely opposed last year by several iwi, which believe the redress encroached on their own tribal boundaries. The Waitangi Tribunal found that the Crown didn't either engage with the claimant groups before signing the Parihoraki settlement deed or engage with them too late. The Minister, Andrew Little, says he accepts the findings.
That's the lesson I draw from this, is that when we are negotiating with any iwi, once we are aware that there is a reasonable risk that there are overlapping interests, then we have to be engaging with them straight away, not leaving it to the end of the process.
Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little. The principal of Flaxmere Primary School says staff and students have responded well after a person was shot on school grounds this afternoon. One person has been taken to hospital following the shooting. The school went into lockdown at about 2:15. Robin Isaacson says the school regularly runs drills to prepare for a shooting on school grounds. Children and staff remained in their classrooms or were rushed inside while the police responded to the shooting. A former school teacher has been sentenced to 2 years and 6 months jail for sexual misconduct involving 2 students. The 37-year-old woman has admitted 7 charges of sexual relations with minors and 2 of sending sexual material to minors. In sentencing in Blenheim District Court, the judge said what the woman had done was a gross breach of trust. The judge declined to grant permanent name suppression, but suppression will remain in place because defence says it will appeal that decision. She is to be registered as a sex offender. Wild weather has battered parts of the country today with a tornado tearing through Waikato this afternoon. Met Service says it hasn't been able to confirm the tornado yet, but a Waiho dairy farmer says it left a trail of destruction at his property at about 12:30. Andrew McGivern says the wind brought down about 15 trees, smashed a window and blew away outdoor furniture. He says clearing the trees could take several weeks.
The actual event itself, by the time the wind got up, went through and picked everything up, it would have been less than 5 minutes. It was pretty short and sharp. And the funny thing is, it went from still to extreme in the blink of an eye, but then it went from extreme to very still again in the blink of an eye too.
Met Service says a frontal system moving from west to east is to blame for the volatile weather. It says winds have reached up to 90 kilometres an hour in parts of the North Island. Flooding means the main highway in Marlborough will remain closed overnight. State Highway 63 through the Wairoa Valley is blocked off between the Branch River and Wairoa River bridges. The Transport Agency says motorists should use State Highway 6 via Nelson instead. Peak hour traffic in Wellington is at a standstill after a breakdown on State Highway 1 out of the city. The truck is blocking the northbound merging lane at the Ngaronga Gorge near Tyres Road. Traffic is also backed up past the Petone roundabout southbound towards the city. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. To sport now, and the Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua says shooter Maria Falau's contribution to the game is immeasurable. The 150-test veteran has announced she's retiring from all netball. Falau, who's 32, first played for the Silver Ferns in 2005 as an 18-year-old and went on to compete at 4 World Cups, including New Zealand's win in Liverpool this year. Taurua says Falau is undoubtedly one of the game's greats.
I think you can't measure, and just like always, you can't compare her to anybody else that's come in. She's got such her own unique, dynamic way of playing the game that is going to be a massive gap. But also, her being able to do that time and time again, without any sweat on her brow. Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua. Kyle Jamieson is still coming to grips with his call-up to the Black Caps for the 2 remaining cricket tests in Australia. The 2-metre-tall pace bowler has been called in to replace injured speedster Lockie Ferguson. Jamieson will fly to Melbourne tomorrow after turning out for Auckland today in a T20 game against Canterbury in Christchurch.
Pretty speechless at the moment. Had a phone call from Gavin Larson just as I was padding up to start training, so that was kind of unexpected, and obviously received the news and had to kind of park it for a couple of hours while we ticked off prep for today's game. So, pretty special moment. Kyle Jamieson. Meanwhile, Peter Siddle has been brought into Australia's squad in place of the injured pace bowler Josh Hazelwood for the Boxing Day test. That's the news.
Bureaucratic answers about tours on Whakaari White Island.
These operators should have been registered.
So why weren't they then?
So each company will form its own view as to whether they thought they needed to be registered, and there was ongoing correspondence between WorkSafe and the operators.
Accusations Pharmac was too slow.
What were they waiting for? Why did it take so long for them to act? Is 3 deaths not enough?
And what council call centres have to put up with.
Things like, hello, is this the number I ring to get a wife?
And is it?
Certainly not.
Here to help. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
And this is RNZ National. We're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, that includes Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Rain, heavy at times, possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers from the west this evening, then clearing by tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain developing this evening, heavy falls clearing tomorrow evening. Whanganui to Wellington, including the Wairarapa. Rain becoming scattered this evening, gradually clearing tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, occasional rain, heavy in places, clearing in the morning tomorrow. Showers returning north of the glaciers tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Canterbury, rain, heavy falls and snow down to 800 metres tonight, gradually clearing to fine tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, remaining rain clearing this evening. A few showers develop everywhere except inland Otago tomorrow. At the Chatham Islands, drizzle turns to rain this evening, possible thunderstorms there tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, 2 very different recovery operations at both ends of the country. We'll go to Pike River shortly, where the re-entry team, led by veteran miner Dingley Pattinson, has today broken the 170-metre seal to the mine. But first, we begin back in Whakatane, where bad weather has hampered the rescue efforts for 2 people missing since last week's eruption on Whakaari White Island. Police today formally named the 2 missing bodies as local guide Hayden Marshall Inman and 17-year-old Australian Winona Langford. Winona's parents, Christine and Anthony, died in the eruption, while her 19-year-old brother, Jesse, is in hospital. The chair of Ngāti Awa Holdings, which owns White Island Tours, has hit out at a lack of clarity over WorkSafe's auditing of the tour company. Paul Quinn says he's already had to reassure staff after the police incorrectly announced a criminal investigation was being launched as a result of the eruption last Monday. 16 people have died so far, including 2 White Island tour staff. 2 other guides remain in hospital, and Mr Quinn says Ngāti Awa will cooperate fully with any investigations. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has this story.
Mr Quinn said he was surprised to hear the regulator's chief operating officer unwilling to give details about White Island Tours audits when being interviewed on RNZ this morning.
The lack of clarity and ambiguity by the WorkSafe chief operating officer doesn't help matters in terms of where, the preciseness of where things are at. Leaving ambiguity floating through the air is really unhelpful.
The Workplace Relations Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, has since cleared it up, confirming a 3-yearly audit was completed in 2017 and 2 surveillance audits have been completed since. But Mr Quinn says it's not the first time it's happened.
Well, I am concerned about the lack of clarity flowing from Crown organisations, and we can go back to the misstep by the police in announcing a criminal inquiry. Clearly that upset our staff.
Since the eruption, Mr Quinn says Ngāti Awa and the tour company haven't spoken directly with WorkSafe, the regulator, other than through lawyers. He's not aware of WorkSafe approaching the tour company about stopping operations when the alert level was lifted to 2 on the 0 to 5 scale back in November. That's because level 2 had long been considered an acceptable level to continue operating at. Mr Quinn says all White Island tour staff are being paid in full through until the end of January, and he doubts any conversations about resuming operations will take place before then. For Cabinet Ministers, it's now a case of waiting for advice in the new year as to whether any further investigations need to be undertaken. The local government minister, Nanaia Mahuta, who is responsible for private islands like Whakaari, is getting her own advice.
There is an MOU arrangement between myself, I understand, and the Regional Council in relation to what happens there. However, I think it's important to ensure post the Whakaari White Island eruption we have greater clarity in how all the various responsibilities fit together, and I'm seeking advice on that.
Mr Lees-Galloway also accepts there are unanswered questions.
WorkSafe do take their responsibility seriously, and I think they are undertaking the activities that they need to. But there is a question there about whether or not the adventure activities regulations are fit for purpose, and I think it is a question that needs to be answered.
His advice to tourists this summer is to ask questions.
My advice to people is it is worth asking if their operator is registered. If the operator is registered, that is a very clear signal that they take their obligations under both the Act and the regulations seriously.
There are already 2 investigations underway following the eruption, and the National Party's Workplace Relations spokesperson, Todd McClay, says government agencies need time to get on top of exactly what happened.
I think it's important that we allow, an inquiry to unfold. National will be supportive in this. We'll have a chance to look exactly what that should be.
For 2 years, WorkSafe has held the view several White Island helicopter companies should be on the regulator's register in the same way White Island Tours is. Mr Lees-Galloway says there are valid questions about why that never happened. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
Meanwhile, the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Marise Payne, has spoken highly of New Zealand's response to the White Island volcanic eruption. 10 Australians are among the formally identified fatalities. 1 remains missing, presumed dead. Since the eruption, 12 Australians have been medically evacuated. 1 of those patients has since died. 3 Australian permanent residents have died in New Zealand hospitals, and 1 has also been medically evacuated. Speaking to reporters, Marise Payne called the response an ANZ effort.
Every single person I've spoken to has used the word seamless. And in time of crisis, in a time of tragedy, then that says a great deal. The repatriation process, the medical evacuations of 12 Australians proceeded so well that it is like we were moving from just one hospital to the next, not across countries, not across the Tasman Sea, but in an absolutely powerful way.
Ms Payne says she has visited the hospitals in New Zealand treating victims.
I have visited Hutt Hospital and Middlemore Hospital here today to convey Australia's thanks for the superlative care provided to Australians who've been injured in these events.
And she says nobody can imagine what those families are facing in the coming weeks and months.
Here in places like Auckland, in Sydney, we're surrounded by Christmas and celebration, but they face tragedy and devastation, and our hearts and thoughts are with them every step of the way.
And that was Marise Payne, the Australian Foreign Minister, and we'll have more on the Whakaari White Island tragedy later in the program, including comment from a lawyer who says some of the injured could be due millions in compensation. Shortly after 11:30 this morning, the Pike River recovery team stepped through a door chiselled into the concrete wall, sealing the mine 170 metres into the drift. It's uncharted territory. No one has been this far since the mine was sealed off 8 years ago after the explosion that killed 29 men in 2010. The team will search the 2.3 kilometre drift 20 metres at a time, looking for any evidence of what caused the tragedy. Chief Operating Officer for the recovery agency, Dingy Pattinson, was one of the 4 who went in today.
It's been a great day. I mean, it's been a long time coming for us. We've done 20 months of planning. We've done 29,000 hours of risk management. We had to go through the exemption process to WorkSafe, and to finally get back through that last door today, through that last barrier, was a really good feeling for us, not only us, but for the family. The whole recovery is a sad thing, but it's been quite a happy day for everybody, so it's been really good.
People who are watching this will see you basically opening this makeshift door in a concrete wall. So can you explain to me, how did that get there? When did it get there? And were you the first guy through?
Yeah, look, the original wall was built back in 2011 with New Zealand Mines Rescue built that, which I was part of back in 2011 after the explosion. The door was built into it then, and since then it's been all sprayed over with concrete. Today and preparing yesterday, we chipped away the concrete, exposed the door, and we walked through it.
What time was that?
Around about 11:30 this morning. We went through and we spent about an hour and a quarter on the other side of a wall. So there was a few things we had to do. The objectives was, first thing you have to do was we wanted to do a hazard assessment and a geotech assessment of the roof and the walls to make sure the ground was good. And we're only talking about a 20-metre zone, because the whole plan has us going up the tunnel in 20-metre increments. So 20 metres was the maximum distance we went, or we're going to go today. We knew that at around about 15 metres past the wall, that there's an area where we have to do some roof support. So that's as far as we went today. And we barricaded that off with a netting barricade with signage on it, so that no one accidentally goes beyond that point. And then we done a forensic scan, and we got some good information for our future planning for when we want to pull the wall down and start removing the conveyor belt and starting our way up the tunnel.
So did you step through first?
Yes, I did.
And you were back there. You were last there, as you say, when plans were being made for that barrier to go up. What was it like to be back in there?
Oh, look, it's just a relief for us all, and a good feeling for the fact is that we're actually commenced the full recovery of the tunnel. That was the last barrier or the last hurdle in front of us, and to get through that and to know we're now progressing up the tunnel is a really good feeling. Not only for me, for everybody up at the site, for everybody at the agency, all the families, everybody. It's not about one person. It's a whole team effort from everybody here in the agency office, from people up at the mine site, all the technical experts, the police, and all of those people, all of the different agencies that have come together over the last 20 months for today. Everyone played a part in today, not just the 4 people that went inside behind the wall today.
Because some people said it couldn't be done.
Oh, look, a lot of people said it couldn't be done, and we've spent a long time planning it with technical experts, and we've put a plan forward that proved, yes, it can be done, but we have to follow that plan. if you step outside of that plan, that's when things will change and things will go wrong. So we've got to be particular that we follow our plan to the nth degree.
So there is video. You say there's 4 people who went in. If you look at the video, you can see 4 people disappearing, just their reflective gear in the video, disappearing into the mine further. So what could you see?
Oh, look, when we went in on the other side of the wall, you can see the conveyor belt, you can see the piping along the walls, the old slurry lines, the compressed air lines, the water lines, electrical cables that run into the mine,
And is any of that of immediate interest to you? Could you see anything out of the ordinary?
No, there's nothing out of the ordinary. There's nothing that changed from when we were in there in 2011.
So what happens now?
So what happens now, the next stage for us, is that we've closed the door up for Christmas, but we're leaving fresh air in the tunnel, so that we'll get another 2 weeks of monitoring the atmosphere, because the important thing for us is that we maintain, now we've taken nitrogen out and we've put fresh air in, that we maintain a safe, stable atmospheric environment underground in that tunnel. So we'll get another 2, we've been monitoring this for the last 2 weeks. We'll monitor it for another 2 weeks over Christmas, and that'll just give us more data, more information to prove the plan we put together is correct. And so after the break at Christmas, we'll come back, we'll open the door again, and then we will start dismantling the wall and then start progressing up the tunnel. But bear in mind, we know there's an area of roof support we have to redo 15 metres further along the road.
I noticed you've put up another mine tags board today.
Yeah, a tag board. Now, that's one of our procedures we put in place, because once we remove that wall, a criteria we put on ourselves is that there's no more than 6 people in that tunnel at any one time. And the reason for that is because we have a refuge chamber underground there, a safe haven, and that only holds 6 people. So we have to ensure that no more than 6 people go in there. So if you looked at that tag board, you would see all of our tags on the outside, on the outboard, but on the inboard, you'll only see 6 hooks. So no more than 6 people can go in that mine. And that's just a control. If someone went to walk up and went to tag in and seen, there's already 6 tags, he can't go in. He's got nowhere to put his tag.
Are you knackered after being down there today?
No, look, it's just a normal day for mining people, to be honest, and that's all it is. But everybody's worked hard towards today, and everyone deserves to be happy and celebrate. But look, the guys will be back on the job up there tomorrow.
And that's Dingy Pattinson, who was one of 4 men who went past the 170-metre mark in the Pike River mine drift. If you want to look at those remarkable pictures, we'll put them up on our Facebook page, and they'll also be on our website. It is 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. You can text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email, and our address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A former schoolteacher has been sentenced to 2 years and 6 months jail for sexual misconduct involving 2 students. The 37-year-old woman has admitted 7 charges of sexual relations with minors and 2 of sending sexual material to minors. In sentencing in the Blenheim District Court, the judge said what the woman had done was a gross breach of trust. The judge declined to grant permanent name suppression, but suppression will remain in place because the defence says it will appeal that decision. She's to be registered as a sex offender. Hamish Cardwell is in Blenheim and joins me now. Hamish, what did the judge say in sentencing this woman?
He said, hi Lisa, he said, look, there's a number of aggravating features to her offending. He said the age discrepancy was more than 2 decades. These young boys were under the age of consent, so under the age of 16. The fact that there were that the offending happened on multiple occasions and that it involved full sexual intercourse, and that there were 2 victims meant that he decided that she should go to jail. He also said that one of the main aggravating features was the fact that, she was a mature woman. She was in a position of senior leadership at the school. She was the head of the languages faculty, and she was also actually the wellness coordinator, and that what she did was a gross breach of trust.
What was her reaction when the prison sentence was handed down?
Throughout sentencing today, the offender was incredibly impassive, showed very little emotion. She sat and listened attentively, but displayed very little emotion. And once the sentence was read out, she stood up and then walked immediately from the dock and was gone.
And what about families of her victims? Did any of them attend court today?
The place was packed today, and I would note that a lot of the people who were there were potentially younger people in their 20s and 30s. Now, I was waiting outside the court immediately after the sentence was handed down and noted that the defence lawyer was speaking to a group of people, and so I ascertained that they were likely to be supporters of the offender. There was at least maybe 10 of those. So there were definitely supporters for the offender.
And so the judge has declined to grant permanent name suppression. What can you tell us about that?
The judge really went through that quickly, just basically given the reasons that I outlined before, the aggravating features of her offending, that this was a person who was employed with a position of trust, that as a teacher she had been given professional training and was attuned to the impact this kind of offending would have on young people who are developing and growing into themselves and into their sense of worth. So, decided that there wasn't enough things acting in her favour to allow her to get that high-level threshold, which is permanent name suppression.
Thanks, Hamish. That's Hamish Cardwell, who was at the sentencing of a former school teacher who's going to jail for 2 years, 6 months for sexual misconduct involving 2 students. The Waitangi Tribunal has released a scathing report on how the Crown dealt with iwi opposed to the Pari Hauraki Treaty settlement, saying it not only trampled on their mana but created fresh grievances. The settlement was fiercely opposed by a number of iwi, which believed the deal encroached on their own tribal boundaries. Tianiwa Hurihanganui reports.
It's considered one of the most contested settlements of all time. The Pari Hauraki settlement drawing hundreds of people to Parliament in protest last year. The Waitangi Tribunal heard from 4 groups opposed to the settlement, each claiming the Crown breached the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi by failing to consult with them properly about their overlapping interests. Far North iwi, Ngāti Wai, claims it should have been consulted earlier about redress promised to Pari Hauraki on Aotea Great Barrier Island, an area they believe to be within their rohe. But Ngāti Wai chairman, Āpirahama Edwards, says the Crown initially chose to consult with another group instead.
It's been extremely frustrating where we have consistently asked for a process that embraces tikanga. We were ignored. We have gone through every avenue available to us to try and have these very real issues addressed.
The Waitangi Tribunal found the Crown either didn't engage with any of the groups before signing off on the Pari Hauraki settlement or engaged with them too late. In some cases, the groups agreed to certain aspects in the Pari Hauraki settlement only to discover later that the Crown had offered something more or different. Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little says he accepts he should have consulted with iwi earlier.
That's the lesson I draw from this, is that when we are negotiating with any iwi, once we are aware that there is a reasonable risk that there are overlapping interests, then we have to be engaging with them straight away, not leaving it to the end of the process.
Tauranga-based iwi, Ngai Te Rangi and Ngāti Ranginui claimed their rangatiratanga or authority over tauranga was trampled on when the Crown agreed to give Pari Hauraki shared authority over the Tauranga harbour. Despite expressing their opposition, both iwi discovered by chance the settlement redress contained a clause allowing Pari Hauraki to participate in a Tauranga harbour governance group. Andrew Little says he now intends to work with iwi on both sides to find a solution over the disputed area.
I accept the criticism that the tribunal has made that even from the outset there was a failure to do enough on overlapping claims and overlapping interests, and I think the Crown's duty now is to work with iwi on both sides of the argument to get the tikanga-based process underway.
The Waitangi Tribunal has recommended that the Crown immediately halt the progress of legislation giving effect to the Parehauraki collective settlement deed until a proper overlapping claims process is complete. Parehauraki Chief Negotiator Paul Majuri says he's willing to meet with iwi again to find a way forward.
The Tribunal has come out and said what needs to happen as far as it's concerned, and we need to reset and try and do this again in a way where everyone's showing some good faith and honour in how we approach these things.
But it won't be easy for some who say the process has opened new grievances and fractured their relationship with the Crown. Andrew Little has agreed to try again and find a solution to the overlapping interests, this time through a process that respects tikanga Māori. For Checkpoint, I'm Tianiwa Hurihanganui.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, journalist Baruz Boushani tells Checkpoint he's still in New Zealand despite his 30-day visa expiring over the weekend. A Florida lawyer says cruise passengers who were on Whakaari White Island when it erupted could be eligible for millions of dollars in compensation. And after 150 tests for the silver ferns, Maria Falau announces her retirement. We would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now.
Thank you, Lisa. A four-man team has moved beyond the 170-metre seal in the Pike River mine for the first time in 8 years. It's seen as a major development in the painstaking job of examining the 2.3-kilometre entry tunnel to the mine. The police have begun scouring the far eastern Bay of Plenty coastline as the search continues for two bodies missing after the eruption on Whakaari White Island. The missing have been named as 40-year-old local tour guide Hayden Marshall Inman and 17-year-old Australian Winona Langford. Whakatane fishing and tour operators say they're losing thousands of dollars a day due to restrictions put in place following the eruption. As they head into what is usually their peak season, they're anxiously waiting to hear more details about the relief package to be offered to small businesses. The principal of Flaxmere Primary School says staff and students responded well after a person was shot on school grounds this afternoon. A lockdown has been lifted and one person has been taken to hospital following the shooting in Hastings. Parts of Auckland got more rain today than they did for the whole month of November. The Met Service meteorologist says the Auckland region, had a total of 40 millimetres of rain last month, which was surpassed in some areas just today, including at Whenuapai, where 50 millimetres has fallen in the past 12 hours. An Austrian oil company has been given the green light for a controversial consent to drill off the Otago coast. The Environmental Protection Authority granted OMV GSB Limited's application to drill up to 10 exploration and appraisal wells and discharge into the ocean. And the Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua says Maria Falau's retirement had been looming for the past year. Falau, who's 32, played 150 tests. She's today announced she's retiring from all netball. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. And if you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business now with Nona Peltier, who's joined me in the studio. Nona, so have we had a festive season bounce in consumer confidence?
Well, it seems so, but it probably has a lot to do with interest rates and just people feeling a little bit more confident about their own position and the broader economic outlook. And also we had that was from the Westpac Confidence Survey this morning. We also had the ANZ Business Confidence Survey this afternoon, and it sort of implied similar, although businesses are still pessimistic. A net 13% of businesses expect conditions to deteriorate. However, they're more optimistic about their own outlook, and a net 17% expect better times ahead. They expect a higher staff, and it's the best level we've seen since April last year. So much more positive tone leading into the holiday season. Could be that, just could be the interest rates.
Okay, so you've got this think tank that, they're thinking that it's feasible to rebuild the railway line. This is between Wairoa and Gisborne, but Kiwi Rail has kind of rejected that previously.
Yeah.
So has something changed?
Well, yes, actually. What's changed is this wellness budget. So Burrell, which had a hand in developing that, also is the organisation that developed this report for a rail trust based out of Gisborne. And they'd been calling for a similar sort of report for some time because they thought that it was actually feasible. And if you take the business case out of it, so if you don't make a business case for it and you just look at other indicators, social, cultural, environmental, and economic to the region, it makes a lot more sense. And in those parameters, Burrell's recommending that, it is a feasible, but they also said this is not based on a business plan. That would be up to Kiwi Rail. Now, when Kiwi Rail looked at it back in 2012, they thought it would cost about $4 million to reinstate, but they stacked that up against what they would make, and including also the running maintenance on the line, thought it wasn't worthwhile. They wouldn't make enough off of it. And yet Burrell has come up with numbers of between 30 and 36 million to put it back into operation, and that includes $13 million to keep it up for the next decade, and thought it was still worthwhile. So that just goes to show, if you measure something against one set of measurements and opposed to a different set, you can get quite a different outlook.
Yeah, and depends also on how much weight you put on each of those measures, whether they're equally weighted or you value some things higher than others.
Right, and this is a different way of thinking. We saw this coming through on the wellness budget. Now we're seeing it coming through in other kinds of reports. So it's interesting, but it's going to cost more. So we'll see whether or not that stacks up. And overall, the NZX Top 50 Index, it rose 0.33% today, 34 points up to close at 11,261. And our Kiwi is perked up a little bit, not much I'd say, 65.97. So that's just under 66 US cents, 95.8 Australian and 49.6 British pence. And that's mostly because people are now worried again about a hard Brexit exit.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Palsier with our business news. A good strategic move is how a leading human rights lawyer describes refugee Bruce Buchani's bid to turn a book tour in New Zealand into a longer stay. The Kurdish-Iranian writer and journalist travelled to New Zealand from Papua New Guinea on UNHCR documents and a visitor's visa in November to speak at a literary festival. Now, that 30-day visa has now expired, but Mr. Buchani is still in the country. Mr. Buchani, who fled Iran for fear of persecution, had been detained by Australia on Manus Island for 6 years before being sent to PNG. Last month, he told media he had been accepted by the United States for resettlement. When the award-winning writer arrived in New Zealand last month, he said he would not seek asylum here for now. But Bruce Buchani has confirmed to Checkpoint he's still in the country and will be until at least the new year. He didn't answer our questions about whether he's applied for asylum. I asked human rights lawyer Craig Tuck what a person's status is once their visitor's visa expires.
Technically, if you don't have a visa, you're subject to be deported, subject to any other application you must make. And in this case, I presume there's an application. I don't know the details of the case, let me be frank about that, but as I understand it, it may well be the situation that an oral or written application is made.
So, Craig, is that as simple as phoning immigration and saying, this is my intention, I was here on a visitor's visa and I'm going to seek asylum? Is it that simple?
Yes, I think you can do that even as you come through an immigration checkpoint, and the application can be made orally just by talking and saying that's what I'm doing. Or in writing, it then needs to be signed and submitted.
What we do know from Mr. Buchani himself was that he is part of a refugee exchange between the US and Australia. And he has made comments to the effect that he has the opportunity to go to America. If you have a country that has said, we will take you, yes. How does that play when you are then saying you are seeking asylum in another country?
Well, it's a fascinating situation because, of course, somebody can seek asylum anywhere, of course, that they touch base on or in the country. subject to any other procedure. So he's certainly not excluded from that. But I guess the question is, well, if he's got somewhere else to go, why does he need to come here? And at the heart of that question, then, if we start to look at, first of all, the discretion of the US and whether they can exercise in an arbitrary fashion, given that he's not in Papua New Guinea anymore, whether that technically has changed the American position. But of course, the American position could change in a heartbeat. It could change as the wind changes, as we've seen their global sort of strategy move and shift depending on the way the wind's blowing or the political will at the time. There is a concern, I would have thought, that if you are caged in Papua New Guinea, and we're seeing thousands, possibly tens of thousands in the US, caged asylum seekers in the US while those sorts of determinations are being made, is he swapping one cage for another even if he could get there? Or would there be an arbitrary decision in the meantime, which would mean that whilst immediately available supposedly in the US, that could change over time? He's entitled to apply in New Zealand, given the certificate that he's got, given the procedures that he's followed, and looking at his contribution, it's pretty significant and would be a great value to New Zealand in any event, I would have thought. Very talented, motivated man that is perfectly entitled to avail himself of the processes that we've got here. So,
well, that raises the question, doesn't it? That does having a book tour and a few photos with politicians assist your position?
Well, it may well do. It may well do, but I guess it comes back to what is the nature of the test and what is the threshold, and whether or not if he was to go somewhere else, I mean, he's certainly at risk at some parts of the world, whether or not that he's indicating or showing to New Zealand that he's got a contribution to make, that he's got a well-founded fear elsewhere, but he's not going to be here as a freeloader. He's not going to be here as somebody that's potentially dangerous to our society and to our way of life, and that he is somebody that can really contribute, quite separate to his application, but he's kind of providing an asset side of the equation, not just a downside.
So just to be clear, regardless of whether someone else has extended the opportunity for him to settle in their country, in this case, we believe America, he is within his legal rights to seek asylum anywhere else he chooses? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And in fact, as I see the definition, the situation that he is he's landed in New Zealand, he's on New Zealand soil, he's entitled to make an application, that any argument that suggests, well, he potentially goes elsewhere, well, he's not, he doesn't have nationality in any other country, he doesn't in the US. I mean, that is the option that's being provided as the alternative. And my view and submission would be that could change quickly. And in any event, even if that relationship is maintained, who knows what sort of situation he's going into, given the changing landscape and having to navigate that situation in the US.
Immigration, would you think, this would have been in the forefront of their mind when they issued a visa to a person of this profile who was clearly coming from Papua New Guinea, had been in camps in Manus Island? Would immigration have been thinking, or should they have been thinking, it is likely or probable that this man will choose to stay on here and seek asylum?
I think they'd be incredibly naive if they didn't consider those sorts of options, as they would do with anybody coming. And clearly there were no SIS flags or any other alerts on his file as he came into New Zealand, that there would have been a due process followed, and that immigration would be well aware of potential other applications that he could make when he was on New Zealand soil.
Can you see why he may not want to go to the United States?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I was in his situation, I think any citizen in his situation, once you've got to New Zealand and there's a potential to stay here, we have quite a different, in my view, a much kinder landscape and much more welcoming and accommodating than the harsh reality of Australia and their detention camps and the US and their camps, should there be, an interpretation that changes from their perspective, regardless of what the UN have said about it.
So what would your advice be to him as a lawyer then? Stay in New Zealand?
It's a great place, and you're a very talented man that could contribute a lot. And I imagine, without going into the details of his case, that he's supported by a lot of people in the substance of his claim, but also in the process by which he gets there. I'm not sure what his actions have been to date in relation to this, but in general terms, this probably was quite a good strategic move, I would have thought.
And that's human rights lawyer Craig Tuck. Wild weather has battered parts of the country today, bringing down trees and smashing windows in Waikato. Met Service has issued a severe thunderstorm watch for the central and upper North Island, which is in place until 9 o'clock tonight. The heavy rain and strong winds are being caused by a slow-moving front travelling from west to east, but it's due to ease tomorrow. Ananzaki filed this report.
Andrew McGivern has a big clean-up on his hands after his Waiho dairy farm was hit by the wet and wild storm just after noon today.
Myself and my son were just standing in our living room in our house, and we turn around and we next thing we know, there's lawn furniture going past the window, and we've got quite a big pergola type out front with some very heavy beams on top, and they were all coming down as well. And then before we knew it, the big glass pane exploded inwards into the house too.
Mr McGivern says the wind lasted for a matter of minutes, bringing down around 15 trees, which could take some weeks to clear.
The actual event itself, by the time the wind got up, went through and picked everything up, it would have been less than 5 minutes. It was pretty short and sharp. And the funny thing is that it went from still to extreme in the blink of an eye, but then it went from extreme to very still again in the blink of an eye too.
His wife Jenny says it was as if a wall of wind hit the farm.
I mean, as farmers, we shouldn't be complaining because we do badly need the rain, but just not through broken windows.
Met Service says around parts of Auckland and Northland there have been wind gusts of up to 90 kilometres per hour, but its radars did not detect a tornado. Its meteorologist Peter Little says a frontal system moving from west to east is to blame for the volatile weather.
Well, it's been quite a slow-moving situation. We're in what we call a blocking pattern at the moment. So rather than a weather system moving very quickly across the country, we've had this one move very, very slowly, and that's what's allowed a lot of rain to fall in places like Nelson, where it's been very exposed to the northerly airstream.
The wild weather has also affected other parts of the country, with flooding closing State Highway 63 at the Wairau Valley in Marlborough overnight. 2 tourists were rescued in the Tasman district after being trapped on a riverbank by heavy rain and rising water levels at the start of the Heafy track. But Peter Little says the good news for those impacted by the bad weather is the front is expected to move away from tomorrow. For Checkpoint, this is Ananzaki.
It's about 13 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hundreds of fires continue to burn across Australia as a nationwide heat wave is predicted to smash all records in the next few days. Many communities around the country are preparing for the bushfire crisis to get a whole lot worse. One blaze is getting ever closer to a coal-fired power station that supplies 10% of the electricity in New South Wales. But that's just one fire in a crisis that is going to the next level. The ABC's Thomas Oriti reports from Sydney.
50 metres by 40 metres, totally involved in fire with gas cylinders inside.
The fires continue to spread. There's no rain and temperatures are set to soar. And for some fighting to protect their homes, it's already been a tough summer, just a couple of weeks in.
There's a lot of people going hard and they'll probably fall over at the end.
Shane McLaughlin owns a cider business at Bilpin, northwest of Sydney, where the mammoth Gospers Mountain fire is on his doorstep.
On the Sunday, we were just preparing didn't think anything was going to happen, and then pretty much an Armageddon situation came in across Rambring and Mount Tomah and near the gardens there, and just came straight through and was upon us from the Mount Wilson fire within half an hour, and no one was overly prepared, but it took out a few properties.
That fire alone has now burnt through more than 400,000 hectares.
I mean, the worst thing is that you lose several weeks or months of income sort of thing. You know, no one's been coming to the mountains for weeks now, and it'll go on for a while too.
While the conditions are milder today, that's set to change, with the mercury to soar on Thursday and Saturday. And that's led to concerns about the impact the mega blaze could have on the Mount Piper power station to the northwest of Lithgow, the fourth largest in New South Wales, which generates a tenth of the state's electricity. Last night, the Rural Fire Service was concerned embers could get into large coal piles. But Deputy Commissioner Rob Rogers says the weather appears to be in favour of fire crews.
The fire is still a few kilometres away from that area. Luckily, it's not going to get the worst of the weather because the fire is to the east of that. So when those strong westerlies kick in, they won't be pushing it towards that area. So, look, there's a lot of units there monitoring that. So we're quite confident on protecting that facility.
The heatwave's already being felt in the state's west, with temperatures set to hit 42 degrees. But in parts of South Australia, it's even worse.
You basically don't go outside. You only do what you really have to do.
Hayley Nunn is the manager at the Pink Roadhouse in Oodnadatta, a remote outback town almost 900 kilometres north of Adelaide. It's a town that's used to the heat, but not always like this. Temperatures are forecast to hit close to 50 degrees.
Well, you do your jobs early in the morning or late in the evening. We are actually closing now from between 1 and 5 in the afternoon, but the locals don't come out. They come out the same in the morning or late afternoon.
Authorities in South Australia have declared a code red, meaning extra accommodation and services will be available for those sleeping rough. The Red Cross will also be checking on the elderly, with the state to swelter through 4 days over 40 degrees and overnight minimums dropping to the mid-20s. Dermot Barry is the Deputy Chief Officer of the South Australian State Emergency Service.
We know that the number of hospital presentations will increase, that the demand on ambulance services will increase. It's just what happens when this weather comes. People just can't escape it, and it really starts to accumulate, build up and impact on them.
The heat's expected to take its toll in northern Victoria too, where many towns are heading towards consecutive days of temperatures in the 40s. And parts of Queensland have already experienced scorching conditions this week, with several temperature records broken in the southeast. While in Western Australia, milder temperatures forecast for Perth are expected to provide relief to firefighters. But it comes after heatwave conditions. Noel Puzzi is from the state's Weather Bureau.
I think average temperatures are running about between 4 to 5 degrees above the norm for this time of the year.
The state's average maximum temperatures for the month are expected to reach record highs.
Thomas Oriti with that report. The Tauranga City Council has finally voted in favour of gifting a piece of contested land back to a hapu after a year of going back and forth. The previous council had vetoed this at the end of last year after public consultation showed 58% of people were against it. But much to the relief of the Otamataha Trust and the Elms Foundation, who will lease the land, the newly elected council has finally put an end to the matter. Mediana Johnson reports.
Cheers rang out in the public gallery as Tauranga City councillors voted to end the dispute about who should get 11 Mission Street. 3 councillors voted against, including Councillor Hollis, who accused those voting in favour of political correctness.
If as councillors you decide to gift completely to Otamataha Trust, then you'd better look hard at yourselves and decide whether integrity truly matters, or whether you're operating from a framework of political correctness, putting some sort of virtue signalling ahead of the wishes of the community as a whole.
But Mayor Tenby Powell says this is about doing the right thing.
I do believe that it is time to do the right thing and to have the moral courage to do so, and to give some mana back to iwi, and at the same time to bring the city together. So I too will be voting for this.
Pere Kohu from the Otamataha Trust can't remember the last time a piece of land was gifted back to the hapu. He says tangata whenua have been pushed out of Tauranga for too long, but this has given them hope they can have true partnership.
And the mayor is really encouraging with, the kōrero that he's portraying, because at least he's taking a leading role in bringing some of that together. Well, we've been ready to do that for a long time. We're always talking about where's the partnership.
The Elms Foundation will lease the land from the hapu and build an education centre. Its chair, Ian Thomas, is relieved the council has finally made the right decision.
So much time spent by Otamataha as well as us over the changing whims of the council, which haven't helped anybody at all. Their process has been pretty poor, really, one would have to say. But there we are, we were stuck with it.
He says the foundation will have regard for tikanga in all the work they do. Next year, the Trust will begin demolishing the existing property at 11 Mission Street and the connecting property number 7. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
The Silver Ferns netball coach, Nolene Taurua, says shooter Maria Folau's contribution to the game is immeasurable. The 150 Test veteran has announced she's retiring from all netball. Folau, who's 32, first played for the Silver Ferns in 2005 as an 18-year-old and went on to compete at 4 World Cups, including New Zealand's win in Liverpool this year. She's also won 2 Commonwealth Games gold medals. Her last game for the Silver Ferns was against Australia in October in the Constellation Cup. Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua told sports editor Stephen Hewson that Folau is undoubtedly one of the game's greats, and she'd known for the past year that Folau's retirement was edging closer and closer.
It's been something that I've been wary about, not only recently, but also, leading into the Netball World Cup as long as last year, and also Constellation Cup. I had a bit of a gist that it was getting closer every time that we talked or we met, and I've known for a wee while, but we've just been waiting for her to make that final decision.
Maria Folau has been such an integral part of the Silver Ferns for so long. How do you measure the gap that she leaves?
I think you can't measure, and just like always, you can't compare her to anybody else that's come in. She's got such her own unique, dynamic way of playing the game that is going to be a massive gap. The biggest things are her style, her brand, her uniqueness of shot, but also, her being able to do that time and time again, without any sweat on her brow, and looking beautiful as ever. So, she's just got a unique way, a game breaker, and that will be sorely missed.
Things undoubtedly haven't been easy for her over the last 12, 18 months with the Israel Folau saga. Do you think that took a toll?
Oh, no doubt. I think, there has been massive, not only for her and her husband, but I think everybody who sort of has connection with her, and people probably questioning their own beliefs or where they sit as well. So no doubt that there has been a massive part of her life over the last 2.5 years, and, her thinking about what she is going to do, whether she is involved in netball or she can be free and say what she wants. Really glad once again that she was committed to us and to the brand, to the Silver Fern brand, and she was 100% towards that right through to the end.
Well, the other question too is about the future of Nolene Taurua. Are you any the closer to deciding what you might do?
I just got back on Monday and relocated the family, and I'm really comfortable and happy actually to be home. So, it is becoming positive more and more as I'm sort of thinking about things, and time will tell as to what I'm going to do. But really happy where I currently am sitting and what I'm being able to do so far in the netball world.
So I sense what you're saying there is you might be leaning more to staying now, that getting back home has maybe given you a bit of a nudge towards that decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to be on New Zealand soil, I sort of feel, and even though I'm still working through what I need to do with my family, find where the gaps are and what I could actually do and where netball sits. So I'm really positive about where things are at, where I'm sitting at the moment, and still do want to be involved in netball, and I just got to work it through.
And that was the Silver Ferns coach, Nolene Todua, speaking to Stephen Hewson. The police have released an update on the search in the area of White Island for the 2 bodies that remain missing. This from Deputy Police Commissioner John Timms. The Police Eagle helicopter has searched Tonawaka Bay, which is near the top of East Cape this afternoon, for any sign of those bodies. The weather around the island today has hampered efforts, preventing an earlier search by Eagle and a shoreline search by boat. He goes on to say that the police will continue to focus on areas from Whakaari White Island through to the East Cape based on tidal patterns as the weather allows. In the meantime, the HMNZS Wellington has left the waters off Whakaari White Island to be deployed to another operation as it's not required at this time. It will be called back if that situation changes. And we'll have more on the Whakaari White Island tragedy after the 6 o'clock news, speaking to an American lawyer who says some of the injured and the families of those killed on the island during the eruption could be due millions in compensation.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Pike River Recovery Agency's Dingy Pattinson says he'll be celebrating moving beyond the 170-metre seal today with a glass of Coke. A 4-man team, including Mr. Dingy, the Chief Operating Officer, went beyond the seal, the first people to do so in 8 years. It's a major development in the painstaking job of examining the 2.3-kilometre entry tunnel to the mine. Mr. Pattinson told Checkpoint they moved 15 metres beyond the seal, doing forensic work and inspecting the integrity of the roof and walls.
It's just a relief for us all for the fact that we're actually commenced the full recovery of the tunnel. That was the last barrier or the last hurdle in front of us. And to get through that and to know we're now progressing up the tunnel is a really good feeling.
29 men died in the mine in November 2010. The police have begun scouring the far eastern Bay of Plenty coastline for 2 bodies missing after the eruption of Whakaari White Island. The missing have been named as local tour guide Hayden Marshall Inman and Australian Winona Langford. Deputy Police Commissioner Mike Clements says bad weather has prevented helicopters from searching around the volcano and dive teams haven't been able to get back in the water. But he says they searched without success today around Cape Runaway, which is where drift and tide modelling suggests a body that was on the surface of the water may wash up. A charter fishing operator in Whakatane says he's lost thousands of dollars of business because of the exclusion zone in place around Whakaari and the Rahui along the coastline. The Gambler Fishing Charter's owner, Mike Gooden, who was on the first boat to get to White Island after it erupted last Monday, helping to tend to the injured, he says he hasn't been able to get back on the water since, and while the $5 million relief package announced yesterday is welcome, he's waiting to hear the details.
Of course, we've got no idea of the what's going to be available. So until we find out what's going to happen, all I'd like to do, and I stress this point, I want to see being able to pay the people that work for me, and I think most other people want to do that too.
Australia's Minister for Foreign Affairs has given high praise to New Zealand's response to the eruption. Many Australians are among the dead and injured. 13 patients were medically evacuated to Australia, though one has since died. Marise Payne says moving the patients was a joint effort by New Zealand and Australia.
Every single person I've spoken to has used the word seamless. And in time of crisis, in a time of tragedy, then that says a great deal.
Marise Payne says she has visited Hutt and Middlemore hospitals to convey thanks for the superlative care of Australian patients there. A former schoolteacher has been sentenced to 2 years and 6 months jail for sexual misconduct involving 2 students. The 37-year-old woman has admitted 7 charges of sexual relations with minors and 2 of sending sexual material to minors. RNZ reporter Hamish Cardwell was at the Blenheim District Court and told Checkpoint the judge cited aggravating factors.
The offending happened on multiple occasions, and that involved full sexual intercourse, and that there were 2 victims. He also said that one of the main aggravating features was the fact that, she was a mature woman. She was in a position of senior leadership at the school, and she was also actually the wellness coordinator, and that what she did was a gross breach of trust.
The judge declined to grant permanent name suppression, but suppression will remain in place for the time being because the defence is appealing. A Hastings counsellor says students could see the gunman on the school grounds from their classroom. One person is in hospital in critical condition after being shot by police earlier this afternoon. The counsellor, Paleti Oli, says when he heard the news, he rushed to the school and saw parents queued outside anxiously waiting for their children. He says the children were subdued when they were let out of the classrooms. Parts of Auckland got more rain today than they did for the whole of November. Med-Service meteorologist Larissa Maranchenko says the Auckland region had a total of 40 millimetres of rain last month. That was surpassed in some areas just today, including at Whenuapai, where 50 millimetres has fallen in 12 hours.
That's passing Auckland area, so it's moving across North Island at the moment, and with strong northerly winds ahead and heavy rain. Localized downpours, and we've got gusts up to 100 kilometres per hour.
Larissa Maranchenko says the worst of the weather should pass overnight. 2 main highways are closed at the top of the South Island because of heavy rain this afternoon. Flooding has closed part of State Highway 63 in Marlborough, with drivers told to use State Highway 6 instead. But a section of State Highway 6 through the suburb of Moana in Nelson has also been blocked by a slip with a detour in place. The Transport Agency says contractors are on the way to clear the slip between Bisley Avenue and Richardson Street. The closed section of State Highway 63 between the Branch River and Wairoa River bridges will stay closed overnight. It's 4 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The controversy surrounding her husband played a part in Silver Fern shooter Maria Folau retiring from netball. Coach Nolene Taurua believes the 32-year-old Folau, who's played 150 tests for New Zealand, has announced she's retiring from all netball. Her husband, Australian rugby international Israel Folau, was at the centre of a long and bitter dispute with Rugby Australia for a social media post that hell awaited homosexuals and other groups. Taurua says the controversy undoubtedly took a toll.
No doubt that there has been a massive part of her life over the last 2.5 years, and, her thinking about what she is going to do, whether she is involved in netball or she can be free and say what she wants. So really glad that she was committed to us right through to the end.
Nolene Taurua. The Auckland pace bowler Kyle Jamieson has been called into the Black Caps as an injury replacement for Lockie Ferguson ahead of the Boxing Day test in Melbourne. Meanwhile, Peter Siddle has been brought into Australia's squad in place of the injured pace bowler Josh Hazelwood for the match. New Zealand Football says Australia and New Zealand would deliver the highest attended women's in 2023. There are projections of more than 1.5 million spectators and an average crowd of 24,000 if they're awarded the tournament. The 2 countries last week announced a joint bid to bring the tournament to the Southern Hemisphere for the first time. FIFA will announce a winner in May. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, episode 6 of White Silence asks why the Erebus disaster still feels so raw to so many 40 years after the fact. Well, this week's After Dinner speaker, our freshwater geek, Stella McQueen, has the story of Potamopurgus, or the New Zealand mud snail as it's known overseas, where it's running amok, doing to Europe's rivers and streams what the possum's doing to our bush. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Med-Service through to midnight tomorrow Wednesday, Northland through to Taranaki. That includes Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Rain, heavy at times. Possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers from the west this evening, then clearing by tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain develops this evening, heavy falls clearing tomorrow evening. Whanganui to Wellington, that includes Wairarapa, rain becoming scattered this evening, gradually clearing tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, occasional rain, heavy in places, clearing tomorrow morning. Showers returning north of the glaciers tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Canterbury, rain, heavy falls and snow down to 800 metres tonight, gradually clearing to fine tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, remaining rain clearing this evening. A few showers develop everywhere except inland Otago tomorrow. And at the Chatham Islands, drizzle turning to rain this evening, possible thunderstorms tomorrow morning. It's nearly 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for tuning in. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and I'm Lisa Owen. Police have formally named the 2 people missing after the Whakaari White Island eruption as local White Island tour guide Hayden Marshall Inman and 17-year-old Australian Winona Langford, who was travelling on the cruise ship Ovation of the Seas with her parents, Kristen and Anthony, and 19-year-old brother Jesse. It comes as an American maritime lawyer says the cruise company could be liable for millions of dollars in compensation if it or the tour company failed to properly warn sightseers of the risks. Jim Walker, who specialises in cruise law, says any injured passenger from Ovation of the Seas or the families of those killed can sue the parent company, Royal Caribbean, in a Miami court, as specified in the cruise company's terms and conditions. And that's regardless of where the accident happened or the nationality of the victims. Mr. Walker says any claim of negligence will focus on what warnings sightseers to the volcano were given.
We've seen the online excursion description, which is typically referred to in the passenger ticket. There are no warnings whatsoever. There are no warnings in general, and there's no warnings unique to the White Island volcanic excursion experience. So it doesn't appear to us, based upon any of the available information, that there were any warnings by the cruise line to the passengers that were taken to the excursion itself.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's unusual, quite frankly. We've had dozens of cases against Royal Caribbean involving injuries and accidents during excursions. Typically, there's some type of warning contained in the literature. This is the first time we haven't seen any available warnings at all in the online brochures that are typically used by the cruise lines to try to get out of these types of legal issues.
In your legal opinion, is that negligent?
Well, it appears to us that the cruise line legally clearly had an obligation to warn of dangers that they knew about or should have known about. We know that the New Zealand Geological Agency, GeoNet, issued a warning, forecast a warning of eruptive activity that was going to be in the future. And it turned out just 6 or 7 days later, more likely than normal. That's clearly a warning. That warning should have been conveyed to the passengers by the cruise line, and we believe that if they didn't warn anyone that they took to this excursion, that would clearly be negligence.
I suppose it's also about the level of warning, though, isn't it, Jim? Because obviously some of the passengers, well, all of the passengers were in the care of the tour company when they were on the island, and they would have signed other paperwork as well. So they would have been provided with other material. And it is clearly stated it's an active volcano.
True, but you have to remember the cruise line itself typically sells the excursions like this even before the cruise starts. So you go online, you book your cruise, you pick your excursions. What information was available to the passengers after they had paid the money to the cruise line? Well, was there any warning given to them for them to consider the nature of the risk before they were committed to going on the cruise? In most circumstances like this, it doesn't appear that there were any warnings given. So perhaps the tour operator later gave them some type of warning, some type of paperwork after the cruise had already started and after they were already committed to going on the excursion. That's a little too late in our view. So I don't think that that's an effective warning as far as the timing goes.
Do you accept that adventure tourism has some kind of inherent risk that should be reasonably obvious?
Well, the question here is, many people come back and say this is an act of God. This is clearly not an act of God. An act of God is a completely unforeseeable situation, a lightning bolt down from the heavens, so to speak. But this was a issue that scientists had looked into, where they were issuing warnings that were not only accurate, but seemed to make it entirely foreseeable. So it appears to us to be a perfect situation where they have to give meaningful warnings to passengers who are not familiar with this volcano before they were taken to it.
Jim, have you been in contact with any of the families involved?
We have been contacted by one U.S. family who lost a loved one during this particular volcanic eruption. We're not going to be revealing that family's name. We don't have their permission to do so, but they asked us to conduct an investigation into the liability of the cruise line, and we're in the process of doing that.
And what remedies are available to them?
Well, the thing about the United States legal system, unlike that of New Zealand, is the U.S. legal system has a full range of damages and remedies available to injured passengers. So passengers are entitled not only to financial compensation by way of lost wages and diminishment of earning capacity for those people who are going to be unable to work, but the payment of their medical expenses. And then in addition to all of that, emotional damages for mental anguish, damages for pain and suffering, both in the past and in the future. Many of these families have lost loved ones and will have to endure that grief and bereavement for a long period of time, unfortunately. And then there are people who are still suffering physically and will need medical treatment in the future. Our U.S. legal system is uniquely designed to fully compensate families that have suffered a loss through the negligence of a major corporation like this.
I know nothing compensates a person for disfigurement and being disabled, and for families who have lost loved ones, but potentially are you talking about millions of dollars here?
Well, we have handled, as I mentioned earlier, several dozen cases against Royal Caribbean and against many other cruise lines based here in Miami, Florida. Typically, when the cruise line compensates our clients, they require our clients and require our law firm to execute confidentiality orders called gag orders, where we're not able to talk about the details of prior settlements and prior cases. I can say generally that we've reached settlements against Royal Caribbean in the past involving shore excursion cases in the range of several $100,000s to many millions of dollars in general. Now, what these families have suffered on this particular excursion seems to be quite extreme, and the damage potentially could be larger than these figures that I mentioned. There's also the issue of whether punitive damages could likely be awarded. My initial assessment of the conduct of Royal Caribbean is they appear not only to be negligent, but they seem to have been rather reckless in sending people to this particular crater where a active volcano was going to have eruptive activity more likely than normal without any escape plan. And if there were no warnings whatsoever, that could expose Royal Caribbean to punitive damages. This is a corporation, you've got to keep in mind, that sails their passengers to over 300 cruise ports around the world. And they have many thousands upon thousands, as many as 4,500 shore excursions that they operate and advertise to their passengers. They collect literally over billions of dollars to their, sorry, I've got my phone ringing. They've got a great deal of impetus to push these excursions and to sell these excursions. They have a legal obligation, as I mentioned earlier, to vet the excursions. How on earth can they vet as many as 4,500 excursions? I think they don't do that. They don't devote the necessary resources to really vetting these excursions, double checking them, looking at their safety records, making certain they have safe procedures and policies in such that they're in a position to really understand the nature of the risk so they can convey that risk to the passengers. So punitive damages could be an issue that we're exploring as well.
Have you been in touch with any New Zealand authorities during the course of your investigation so far?
We have not. We've reached out to GeoNet, and there's some other things that we're doing, but we have not been in communication with anyone from New Zealand or Australia yet.
What about Royal Caribbean? What communication have you had with them?
We have had no communications with Royal Caribbean at this time until we make a decision with our client's approval that we're going to be proceeding with the claim. The thing about Royal Caribbean is they will provide no meaningful information to us. They are an organization that if you want information, you have to put them in a court of law. You have to get rulings from the court. They're not going to cooperate. They're not going to play nice. They have been remarkably and unusually quiet from what we've seen so far this past week. They have not made use of their corporate communications. They have not even acknowledged that this was a cruise-sponsored excursion. They haven't identified, although we're aware of the local tour operator, they haven't gone on record of saying this is the responsibility of the local tour operator. They're just simply being quiet.
And that is American maritime lawyer Jim Walker. And so far, Royal Caribbean has refused Checkpoint's invitations to do an interview. Meanwhile, Whakatane fishing and tour operators are losing thousands of dollars a day due to restrictions put in place following the Whakaari White Island eruption. As they head into what is usually their peak season, they're anxiously waiting to hear more details about the relief package being offered to small businesses in the new year. And while all support and respect the rahui that's in place, some are questioning whether it needs to cover such a large area. Anusha Bradley is in Whakatane and filed this report.
With only a week until Christmas, Whakatane's main street is a hive of activity. It's usually a busy time of the year for the bait and tackle shop, fishing and more, but today it's empty. Shop owner Neil Cook says it's been like that every day for the past week.
Well, for me, it's the lack of sales for basically everything. You know, there's so many people can't go fishing, so many people rely on the sea around here for their food.
Soon after the eruption on Whakaari White Island, Ngāti Awa and neighbouring iwi placed rahui on their coastlines. Currently, while 2 bodies are still missing, they remain in place to respect those who lost their lives and their whānau, and protect the Māori or life force where their bodies are at rest. Mr Cook says he respects and understands why the rahui is in place, but he's losing around $1,000 a day in lost sales, and he hopes he'll be eligible for some of the $5 million in relief funding announced by the government yesterday.
I will be applying for that, yeah. Really, at this time of year, you're buying so much product and it's just sitting here. So, yeah. But the biggest thing is that rahui, and I can understand it being on, and I respect that. But now it's probably time to lift it for the local coast and leave it at White Island where it belongs.
Diveworks Charters runs tours to nearby Whale Island, but its boats have been docked for the last week. Owner Phil van der Schoten welcomes the relief package as the 2 weeks before Christmas are usually their busiest, and they're losing more than $2,000 a day.
I don't know very much about it yet. I did see that next year they're going to put it on hold until next year, but it was something that we would probably need to look at. The bills still come in, the staff, especially for our staff. I don't know how it would extend to casual staff who would ordinarily be employed right now.
He says he'll try and keep paying his 4 staff members as long as he can, but they're not taking any bookings until the rahui is lifted. That uncertainty is also affecting Mick Gooden, who runs the Gambler Fishing Charters. He normally takes clients fishing around White Island, but has had to cancel the last 6 days and all bookings for this week.
6 days I've already lost, and that's, you know, I respect that. We certainly respect the dead, and we've got a lot of days ahead of us yet. That the unknown factor is when the rahui will be lifted, and if we get some idea, you know, we can start saying to people, right, yeah, we're going to be up and running again. But certainly in the meantime, it's a financial burden. My deckie's got no work, and of course we all got bills to pay.
And like others, he welcomes the relief package, but is waiting to hear the details.
Well, of course, we've got no idea of the what's going to be available. You know, so until we find out what's going to happen, All I'd like to do, and I stress this point, I want to see being able to pay the people that work for me, and I think most other people want to do that too.
Mick Gooden was on the water last Monday, and his boat was the first to reach the island after the eruption. He says it's been a traumatic time for those first responders.
So you can see from the distance it was a serious situation. So I just asked my clients to put their fishing gear away as quick as we could, and we headed over to the island, got there as quick as we can, and found the devastating situation that these poor people are in.
So what did you do?
Well, we just offered as much comfort as we could, gave them as much fresh water as we could to wash the wounds of the injured people, the burn marks, terrible burn marks, and that's about all we could do, just give them all the towels we could, all the first aid equipment we had on board. The stress factor of this is huge, and I know some people that it's really taken its toll on.
Mick Gooden says when the restrictions are lifted, he and other boat operators are offering to assist families in any way they need. The iwi are expected to release an update on the Rahui tomorrow. In Whakatane for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It is 24 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The National Party says the delay of a final cabinet decision over public broadcasting is the latest broken promise in the government's so-called year of delivery. Broadcasting Minister Chris Foy has confirmed he won't meet his commitment to announce a final plan before Christmas, with ministers now wanting more details about how the proposal would work. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The media industry is under attack from online giants like Facebook and Google, and the government has signalled it wants to strengthen public media. Cabinet yesterday had one proposal to consider: the disestablishment of both RNZ and TVNZ and the creation of a new public media entity. RNZ understands a boost to New Zealand on-air funding was also part of the package. The Minister Chris Foy had said he would make a public announcement by Christmas, but that is not going to happen.
It is important that we get this right. Cabinet colleagues had a few questions, and I think it's fair to go and make sure that those issues are addressed before we make a final decision.
The New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says ministers still have questions.
The totality of the proposal that's before us, what it means, and whether there are any alternative proposals.
National's Melissa Lee says delaying a decision is not the best way to end the government's self-declared year of delivery.
They have yet to deliver on public media that they had actually promised. And also the thing that I'm really upset about is the uncertainty that this announcement, or the lack of, leaves the people at Radio New Zealand and Television New Zealand as they go into the Christmas holidays.
It's understood ministers had concerns about the pace at which the plan was proceeding, the implications for jobs at both broadcasters, and balancing commercial and non-commercial content. Chris Foy was asked whether the delay could push back the timelines he'd been working towards for next year.
I hope it won't. Hopefully some of the questions that we will need to get answered can be answered pretty quickly in order, I think, for colleagues to make a fully informed decision. There's not much that could have been done between now and the new year anyway, so if we can get some of those questions answered quickly, we shouldn't throw too many timeframes out of whack.
National has already expressed its opposition to the proposal, saying one super entity would be too dominant a force in the market, including editorially. Melissa Lee says there was initial talk of a briefing from the minister last month, but since then there's been radio silence.
If there is cross-party agreement on certain things, it could be quite good. But having said that, the minister has not actually briefed me, and I have no details, and as far as I'm concerned, he's not interested.
Government ministers have also been lobbied to support the latest NZME KiwiShare proposal to buy Stuff and set it up as a subsidiary company. While New Zealand First has come out in support, RNZ understands there's little enthusiasm among other Labour cabinet ministers to intervene in the private media market. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
A man has been taken to Hawke's Bay Hospital in a critical condition after being shot by police during an incident at school in Flaxmere today. Hastings District Councillor Pelete Ole says he was in a council meeting when one of the councillors received a message that a gunman had been shot at Flaxmere Primary School. Mr Ole told our reporter Charlotte Cook that ended the meeting and he rushed over to the school.
It was just full of family members. At the gates, they were crowding. It spilled onto the road. with worried looks on their faces, and the police had cordoned off the entrance. I then met up with my colleague, and we were still unaware of what had happened, so I spoke to one of the police officers, and they informed us and let us know that yes, the gunman had been shot, and this they felt was the best option because the gunman did have a gun. He must have had an issue with someone in there, and that's the only knowledge I do have of the incident.
So they were on the school grounds with a gun?
They were in the school grounds, yes. They were in the school grounds, like well in the school grounds. I spoke to some of the teachers. The teachers had said that they were in classrooms, and the gunman and the police were right outside their window. Also spoke to Henare, my colleague. One of his grandchildren had seen the whole thing happen. Apparently the gunman had arrived. I think he had an altercation or an issue with one of the staff there. And the police were, they had responded very quickly and were on the scene. And I think he may have been shot in the abdomen. I'm not too sure.
So the police shot
the police had shot the gunman, yes. It's very, very sad because Flaxmere, we're trying to emphasise the good things that are happening out there. But, this shows the reality, Reality does, pop up and shows the negative side now and then. But the positives are, the kids are safe, the teachers are safe, and no one else was injured except the gunman.
And that's Hastings District Councillor Peleti Orley talking to our reporter Charlotte Cook. Our bulletins will keep you updated through the evening, and don't forget, Morning Report will be with you from 6 a.m. We're back tomorrow night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Search teams looking for 2 missing bodies off Whakaari White Island are likely to encounter murky waters with light ashfall seen in the water near the island. Hastings police say a man they shot and wounded in the grounds of a Hastings primary school had threatened a teacher. Multiple injuries are being reported at a serious crash involving a truck and car on State Highway 30 in Rotomā near Rotorua. And Greenpeace has slammed the Environmental Protection Authority for granting a controversial oil and drilling consent off the Otago coast. Those are the latest headlines. This is RNZ National. We'll have news and weather again at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
$5 million will go a long way to help some of them who are affected by the eruption. I would think they would be quite relieved to hear that.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
I recently noticed those cans of wine fit in the crackers quite nicely.